Okay, welcome everyone. We are back here for another Think and Link, brand new world, and we have two absolutely amazing thinkers on this stage. And so we have not held back in how we're going to craft this conversation and where this is going to potentially go. And if you were on the preamble, you even saw a little bit of it there. It's absolutely going to be amazing. But I want to at least get in a word for our number one sponsor and the firm Capsule, us here in Minneapolis with our worldwide headquarters. We are a special projects firm. We work with clients on interesting design, brand, and marketing challenges, and work in a lot of different categories with a lot of different clients. And we do this for our community to inspire people, to give them a perspective they may not see every day. It is, and you'll see if you go to our website, the Think and Link number of speakers, the past speakers, and who we've had on the stage. It's been absolutely amazing. And we continue to amaze ourselves with these next two. So I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to, and you'll see in the chat links and other things to look at, but also make sure you put in questions for our speakers as we go through this. As you've got thoughts and perspectives, we'd love to hear them. But I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to do next.
No, thank you very much. And again, thrilled to have Chanda and Alison join us here today and have a lot of topics we want to cover. So we're going to try and be as efficient as we can, but very excited. Some very inspiring perspectives you've already shared with Aaron and I in some previous conversations. But before we dive in, would love to hear a little bit of background about both of you. So if I could turn it over to Chanda, you first, a little background about yourself and your journey to us today, and then Alison. Chanda, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning to everyone. And, my journey has been windy, imperfect, and perfect all at the same time. I came into sort of the social sector. I imagined always working in community, with community, on behalf of community. And I am native to Minneapolis. I'm fifth generation on the north side. And I have shared that that experience has formed me. I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm from a neighborhood that has been broadly identified as not being good. And so I grew up wondering what that meant for me. And so my life work really is about thinking about the diverse narratives that we all hold. How do we see the assets and the opportunities and work towards improvement without discouraging? And so that's really my work. And I've lived that out in many ways, including board service, 17 years at Pillsbury United Communities, 7 years as president and CEO, and now 4 years at the Minneapolis Foundation, where I now sit as the chief impact officer and host of a podcast called Conversations with Chanda.
Which we encourage everyone in the audience to listen to. Thank you, Chanda. Thank you. Alison.
Thank you, Kelly and Aaron. And I second that. Listen to Chanda's podcast. It's a wonderful conversations and great way to continue learning and continue on our journey. So I came here to Minnesota a little bit over 5 years ago, moving into my 6th winter. And I'll get to that in just a minute. And I came here from San Francisco. I moved into the museum space 20 years ago or so, and before that, I was in the corporate world. I'm the M in STEM, so mathematician is my background and training, and I've been CFOs, chief financial officers at a number of different organizations. And that's what got me into the museum experience. I went to a large museum in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park for a very large building project as a chief financial officer. And my vision had been to do that project. It was a $500 million project, and then I would leave. And I realized that that was just the beginning for me. And museums are just wonderful institutions, fantastic places that can work with the community and really make a difference and impact in people's lives, and really focus on how can we work with the community to make a difference, make a change. And then through that experience there, I became kind of the second in command after 17 years, and I decided I wanted to run a museum. And I was very fortunate that I was able to come to the Science Museum of Minnesota, which is one of the top museums, top science centers in the nation. And I've been here 5 years. And I want to say it was really moving here to the Science Museum a little bit over 5 years ago that I really came to start understanding my whiteness and my privilege. And that came through a year-long experience I had at the Science Museum, a training that they do over the year. And it has really made a profound impact on my life and my thinking about myself and where I want to do with my life, which is really to help white people understand their privilege and start their journey. And then also to work with the Science Museum and have us talk about ourselves, work on ourselves, and talk about our resources and how we can use those to be less white-centric and to have an impact working with the community. So that's really been my journey in a very succinct way. And I'm proud to be here in Minnesota and very excited to move into my 6th winter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alison. Thank you. Thank you both. A lot, again, we want to cover. And Alison, you just started on a topic that the 4 of us have had some previous conversations, would love to jump right in if we could, and have a conversation about diversity, specifically within the business sector or within organizations. I think we all know that we've heard supplier diversity and inclusion programs, and we know they're impactful from a social standpoint. But they certainly also make sound business sense, right? In light of certainly of national and global economic trends. And would love to hear actually from both of you, number one, your definition of what we call a diverse supplier, what that means, what criteria, because I think it's interesting the perspectives I know we've all heard with regard to the definition of, and then your perspective on why it's not only critical that organizations look outside of their comfort zone and they hire diverse suppliers, but why the more impactful mindset of creating business diversity, which Chanda is a term I've heard you use outside of supplier diversity, it's the business, the overall model, is just, it's a critical component of success within an organization. Chanda, can we start with you? First definition of diverse supplier, what does that mean in the business sense? And then your perspective on really expounding that and making it more of a business diversity and why it makes good business sense for organizations to consider that and really be mindful of that.
Yeah, I actually start with the last piece because I interviewed John Rogers, who co-founded REO Investment in Chicago, and did a podcast with him. It's a fantastic listen because he's amazing. And he really, in the University of Chicago, has been doing a lot of work on moving beyond supplier diversity to business diversity. Mm-hmm. And the reason that is because you could think about your vendor relationships, but you should also be thinking about who you're doing your banking with, who's your attorney, who's your investors and your investment firms. Do they have folks of color that are leading them? Are they working there? And thinking about it as a whole picture. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you are thinking in an inclusive way, when you have a business that prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you are working towards being fair and just, then you look at your process, you look at the diversity of who you're working with, and you identify where you are not, where you have opportunity to be more diverse, whether or not it's with women, people of color. I've been in places where consulting is a prime example, where we use the same consultants over and over again. There's no bidding system. We go to who we know in our, Rolodex, and we pull them out and we go word of mouth. Well, if you're going to the same network and you're getting the same people, you're going to get the same type of thinking. You might have a good process, but are you disrupting the areas you want to disrupt? Are you providing opportunities where you need to be providing? And so I don't necessarily work directly in that space, but I'm in that conversation a lot, particularly with Black firms and in firms of color, women-led firms that say, I can't believe I don't get invited. Right. I can't believe the number of companies that say this is a priority, but yet, here's another bid that we lost out on. Like, how can we ever get to the capacity we need to get to if people are not aligning their words with their action? And these are brilliant people that are well educated and can execute just as competently as everyone else. And so we need to think about how we're showing up in this community if it is in fact a priority.
It's a great perspective. Yes, thank you. And I'd love to ask you both too, and Alison, I'd love for you to respond. I'm sure our audience members too would like to understand. Some organizations, it seems that they don't know how to start the process. They intuitively know this is a critical part of having a diverse mindset within our organization, but how do we get there? How do we work through bias? But it's another topic and we'll cover that in a minute, but thank you, Chanda, that's a great perspective. Alison, can you share your thoughts?
Yes, I'll just feed off of what Chanda said and also recommend listening to that podcast that she suggested. It is great. And I really got that aha moment when he's describing from thinking about supplier diversity to business diversity. And there's a real click in your head to say, I need to think about things differently. And there's this bias that white people have, and I'm a white person, so I'm including myself in this conversation, to think about when you think about hiring BIPOC firms, we need to think about, as Chanda mentioned, firms that are high quality businesses and where there are higher margins. And he also talks about this in the firm, because the way that our society has been set up, we have funneled BIPOC people into lower margin businesses. Some great businesses, but they also are in higher margin businesses, banking, investment firms, and with our biases as white people, we sometimes don't think about that. So that was a really important aha moment for me within that, listening to him about that podcast. So how do we diversify that? And the last point I want to make is, if you look at, there were changes that were made at how government and other firms had to bid out, and they had to include a certain percentage of women and businesses of color. And when you look at actually the results of that change, what's happened the most is women-owned businesses have been the ones that have won most of those contracts. So we need to really break out what's happening and be more mindful and go back into the data and say, why aren't we actually hiring BIPOC businesses? And so I think that's important that we break the data out between women-owned as well as BIPOC businesses, not lump them together.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Yes, again, more meaningful, intentional decision-making, not just trying to check a box, gather data. So thank you both. It's great perspectives. Aaron.
Yeah. So the big heavy one, are we closer to Martin Luther King's dream today or farther away from it? In your perspective, do you think we've made progress? Have we fallen back? Have we just made progress on the surface, but not really underneath? Any perspective on that? Whoever wants to take that really tough one, really fun one.
I mean, has there been progress made since MLK? Yes, yeah. Right. Like, there's been progress, and namely, I can vote now.
Right.
I can vote. I can go into restaurants, and I can use the restroom where I want to. These are profound things to me to be thinking about in my mother's lifetime, the integration of schools, in my grandma's lifetime, going from not being able to move around comfortably, needing to be restricted to parts of town, to be worried about being killed if she even attempted to organize around her rights, or having people in my family be killed just because of the color of their skin. I mean, these are truths that we live into, and they're truths that we still live into in very different ways. And we've seen that happen in May of 2020, and we've seen it happen with Philando, and we've seen it happen with all the other names that get tweeted and hashtagged and that we've witnessed. So I think that there are political and technical advancements that allow us to live in a different way. And then I think that there are the subtleties that I think Alison is understanding better and better and living into in her life's work. And I had another conversation with someone on the podcast where we were talking about, like, there's class and race, or gendered issues. As you elevate class, there's a level of sophistication of navigating those, because you have resources in a different way to navigate them. It doesn't mean those issues go away. It means that you have grown the muscle and the discipline, and you're able to articulate differently, push back differently. You hold a different level of authority that allows you at times to navigate or to know what battles to pick. But it doesn't mean the isms have gone away.
Right.
I think that we have made them less politically acceptable, so they morph into more subtle things that become less believable to those that don't experience it. And you spend your time trying to make those things believable. And again, we saw that, and it became true for us in our city in May of 2020, where Black folks have been talking about their experience with police in our city for years. And now we're talking about it as though we just now understood it. Well, we weren't listening, because we could have been doing these reforms before, and these canary cries have been happening. And so I would never discount the shoulders in which I stand, and many of us stand, to have the opportunity to live, if you so choose, in a more diverse community, in a more diverse experience. I would not discount that, but I also won't Pollyanna away the critical issues that have been stagnant far too long.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Alison, do you have a
Building up.
perspective on that?
Yeah, I of course don't have Chanda's lived experience at all, but some data that shows the stagnation is that since the civil rights movement, the disparity between Black and white wealth has only grown, and household wealth. And there's been no improvement. It's only gotten worse. You can go to the Pew Charitable Trust, and they have some great charts, easy to read charts, easy to find charts around that. So it really supports what Chanda is saying. That is not an accident. That is by design, by the systems design that we've all heard about and talked about. And then just an example of what Chanda said, I was speaking recently with somebody I know very well about the racial disparities in Minnesota. And some of you may not know that Minnesota has the worst racial disparities of any state in the nation around all sorts of factors: wealth, home ownership, education, and some other factors as well. So the worst in the nation. And I was telling her about that, and we were talking about education. She said, "Oh, I'm sure you can find another study and it will tell you a different outcome." And I said, "No, you can't find a different study that'll give you a different outcome." She's lived here for 30 years. She's not from here originally, but she went to college here and she stayed. And so this is just what Chanda said. People, and we've been talking about this for decades. She's well educated, well read, and people just don't want to believe it. White people. She's a white woman. Progressive doesn't want to believe it. So it is there. And the people who need to create the change, are white people. It is not the Black and brown BIPOC people who need to change. It is the white people who are creating this issue.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask the next one, Kelly?
No, this is just, it's related. It's in the same vein. And we talk about education, and we know there's some broken systems, right? There's it's designed in a way that seems to keep people below the poverty line. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on, where are the answers within education? Are there answers in how we redesign these systems for our children and how their journey can be different? It's set up right now, almost in some instances, for failure. There's hindrances. There isn't a clear path to success for a lot of neighborhoods, families, are certainly across the globe. Again, with the focus back to education and your thoughts on how those systems, some redesigning that could occur, that could help us better those systems for the future. Who wants to take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if my response is different across systems, right? Our systems are broken, and we need to redesign mindsets. Right. I don't think there's a curriculum that's going to solve the achievement gap.
Right.
You cannot live into an experience that you don't believe is possible. And I'm not talking about the students. And so if you are teaching and you have not seen a school of poor brown and Black kids that is high achieving, then you're not going to believe it's possible. And those schools exist. They just don't exist here.
Yeah. Right. A lot of what you talk about on the podcasts were like the images that we all see and how they influence us growing up. And the associations we have. Can you talk more about that? Because I think it's for everyone in the population, the images that we see have a profound influence on the perspective we take, what we see and don't see. Just like that, as far as seeing what a successful school looks like, is hard for the people in a population in Minnesota in particular, right? Where they look at a brown and Black school and go, well, I've never seen that be successful. I've never been in that environment. But then broadly speaking, just the images we see and the influence. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, I can. And then I'd love to hear Alison. I mean, I talk with my kids a lot, right? They're 9/11 children where they saw those images and it has shaped their sense of safety. And they have grown up with these images of viral death and violence in a way that I never experienced. So my sense of safety was disrupted in a way, and they assume that these things happen. It's a very different way of going about life. And I think, that's a very sort of maybe an example that everyone can call from. But if you are experiencing a community through a biased lens in which no one from that community is in relationship with you or the people that are talking about it, them, the neighborhood, the issues, that's a problem. And television has evolved, and everything had a point of view that stripped the layers from communities and has shaped how people relate to them. And I think it's unfortunate. And I had the opportunity and the privilege to visit a lot of schools. And, back then, I don't know what they call them now, but 90 schools, 90% kids of color, 90% proficiency, 90% free and reduced lunch.
Mm.
So I have seen 20 or 30 of these schools. And so when I've gone into our higher ed systems and talked about them to groups of teachers getting ready to graduate to become teachers in classrooms and find out that they hadn't heard of these schools, I have a lot of questions.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of questions, and we all know that we get shaped by our experiences. And what I find fascinating is, talking about race and racism with white people, and they're like, I'm not racist. That's not me.
Mm.
And in the very next sentence, they're very comfortable talking about a group of people of color as though they know them, and don't see the hypocrisy in their own ways sometimes, right? Like some people, right? And then there's and I have a lot of friends that I love dearly, that we can talk about these issues, that are white and from other communities of color, and we can talk about our own biases and our own blind spots in the way we show up. This is not about a perfected way of being and understanding other communities. It is about an orientation and a mindset that allows you to decenter yourself, to be in someone else's experience and to see them fully.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very different thing. And as long as our systems do it from one point of view and build it out without consideration of the people that they're there to serve, that's a problem.
Right.
So Alison, I'm curious.
Yeah, there's centering others is the key. We at the museum, we talk about decentering whiteness, where the Science Museum is 114 years old, and a very white institution. And we are trying to decenter whiteness, and what we're doing, trying to change our policies, trying to, it's very much a white supremacy culture that has been established at the Science Museum, and people can look up what that means. This is not white supremacy, but a white supremacy culture. There's things that define that: perfectionism, looking at quality, quantity versus quality, all sorts of things. So we talk about that and trying to change the culture, trying to make it more comfortable for particularly our BIPOC staff, so they can bring their full selves there. And when we talk about the education system,
Mm-hmm.
you need the same thing in an education system. The system is been designed by white people.
Mm-hmm.
And as Chanda said, the conversation needs to be happening in the community, and they need to say, that community needs to say, what do they need for their kids? I can't say what that is. But if they can center themselves and I'm out of the way, and my staff who are BIPOC can work with them, that will lead to success more likely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way we're trying to focus our work, is in partnership, where we're not centering the museum, we're centering the community, and they have the authority. They're at the table making the decisions. And that's the partnership we're trying to do.
Yeah. I see the question in the chat about how do you support BIPOC students, and I think the best way to support them is to be honest with them about what they're going to experience. Mm-hmm. And which might mean getting, folks of color or that represent who they are demographically in front of them, that give them the real deal. right? You're going to go into spaces that are going to aggress against you, right? Here's how you handle it, right? You don't get frustrated. You don't walk out of the classroom. You can't walk out of the meeting when someone, repeats what you just said and takes all your credit. You can't, when they ask you something offensive, you have to find a way to navigate that. When you see a difference in how you're being managed, like that is the truth. And that's why you need to be there. There needs to be a different level of acknowledgement of what is, so that people are not blindsided by the realities of navigating spaces that are not equitable.
That's a great point. So it's not brushing it under the rug. It's address it, but don't say that there's not an opportunity for more or greater, is what you're suggesting, Chanda. It's that we need to be honest, honest conversations. Alison, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
I was just going to add that at the Science Museum, we've also tried to add in some support systems where we may buddy people up with somebody who's already at the museum to help navigate what are some of those unspoken things that we don't even realize are happening at the museum without trying to overburden our BIPOC staff already. And then we also have, I forgot what ERG stands for, employee resource groups. And those can be great ways where they can have conversations and find people that they can reach out to for support.
That's great. Thank you, Alison. If I could, Chanda, quickly, and we talked about this in a previous conversation around addressing this grieving of what we were taught growing up, right? And the relationships in your life and everything that you taught may not be right. I'd love for you to share a little bit more around that, your thoughts there. And then Alison, if you want to add some of your perspective as well.
Yeah, so this is me repeating something I heard from a white guy. And one that I greatly respect, Dr. Ron Heifetz, who wrote Leadership on the Line, one of my all-time favorite books, which actually goes to the conversation we just had, which is, we're sort of raised in leadership not to expect the bumps, and what happens when you expect for the trials to come, right? Like you equip yourself differently. And so we were talking a bit about race, I suppose. And again, this is on the podcast. It's with Ron Heifetz, but he was talking about what happens when you come to recognize your history as it relates to race. Mm-hmm. And you realize that your grandfather, who taught you how to ride your bike, that poured so much into you, also poured some stuff into you that wasn't right. Mm-hmm. Right? The amount of grief associated with that is an undertold story. Mm-hmm. That, again, this is about all of us coming to an understanding, right? Like as I'm navigating, it's equally as important, right? Understanding, I am clear, the impact on my community has been very, very different. But it is still very important for me to understand what the other person is navigating. Mm-hmm. Right? It allows me to move through the world if I understand that. And that in that there's a level of uncertainty, a fear of saying things the wrong way. There's a doubling down of where you feel comfortable because of the high stakes that are around these conversations. Mm-hmm. And as long as those stakes are high, and we have people that are fragile around those conversations, we're not going to break through where we need to go through. Mm-hmm. And part of the understanding that I think is important is the level of grief that is associated with decentering oneself, understanding the history of your community as it relates to the legacy of slavery or the genesis in the Native communities or whatever the atrocities were in this country. Mm-hmm. The legacy and the continuation of not acknowledging it to the extent that I believe it needs to be acknowledged. But there are pieces of that I think we're coming to terms with, right? This moment of racial reckoning. I don't think we are. I think we are in a place of racial understanding, and we got a long way to go. If you don't understand it, you can't reckon. We got people that can't even say the word Black comfortably without a stutter. So we're not there yet in this city. We're just not. So that's kind of what I think, is that we're all grieving something, right? I can grieve the level of freedom that I see people move through. Like, I still grieve that. There's people I see walk through the workday, and I'm like, man, I had to think, I had to overthink, I had to really navigate this in a very different space. Or Alison knows, I walk into spaces and I'm the only person of color. I think about that. I have to adjust to that. Like, I have to, like, there's a readiness for that. There's a reality to that. And it takes on a different weight that is often not understood. And it's not even often asked about or acknowledged. And I think these are the types of conversations that we need to begin to be in. And, you know, Alison, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you see around grief and if that is that relatable or not, but.
Yeah, you made me think of two things. One, I heard a podcast, not yours, but and I don't remember who it was with. They were interviewing a woman who left a cult, and she was talking about her struggle of forgiving her old self for her beliefs. It was some horrible cult. And I think that's part of it too, with coming to understand your racism, my racism, my internal beliefs that I have to acknowledge that I still have. I have to, you know, they're so deep, and my biases are so deep. Sometimes it takes me a while to understand them. As I move, as I'm making decisions and moving to I have to stop and pause. And so I have to let go of my old self and forgive it for what I learned. You know, and these are learned. Studies show it's learned by age 2, 3 in America. It's so deep within America. And then the second thing you made me think of, Chanda, and yes, I totally acknowledge you have to move into these white spaces. And here in Minnesota in particular, it's just we're so segregated, and there's so, it's changing. Census is showing. But I don't understand why white people, and I include myself in this, don't see we have such a better lived experience when we let go of what we've learned. When we become able to appreciate and love multicultural experience, we have better friends. We have, we get to do so much more. Our lives are so narrow with how America wants us to see it and live it. And by letting go of this rigid belief of race, which scientifically does not exist, but culturally does in America, and race was invented by scientists, but it doesn't exist scientifically, and it was invented to justify slavery. That's a whole nother topic. It now exists culturally, and it narrows us. It narrows our lived experience. And I just, you know, I don't understand why white people keep it going forward, because it's not serving any purpose. There's no benefit to it. Yeah. Economically, there's no benefit. Friend-wise, socially, there's no benefit. It is just something we've learned, and we don't, because we breathe it all the time, we don't even see it.
Collectively, economically, it's not beneficial, yes, but individually, I'm in the middle of breathing it to some of us.
Yeah, it hurts white people economically.
Yeah.
That's kind of a nice segue into the other there's a whole bunch of things that I wanted to talk about that spark just the fact that racism doesn't make sense economically. It doesn't make sense for, especially in the creative field, right? We're in a world where diversity, not only diversity, and if we step it back to diversity of mindset and diversity of background of where you originated and all the things you've experienced, honestly, from my perspective, and this sounds exploitative, but it's not, but if I look at someone, and because you can't help but judge based on what you see, right? Your brain does that, the shortcuts that we have. But if you know that exists, you can almost rewire it, right? You can shortcut that shortcut and then see that the diversity of the background of the person actually contributes more to their creativity. So they're an economic advantage for creativity, which is profound if you really look at it. But it's obviously hard for people to get past it. People, that have good intentions, like you mentioned, someone that's a progressive that doesn't think racism exists in the Twin Cities, which is really funny, right? Or that this isn't happening. I guess I should lead to a question there somewhere. Is there, on the economic side of it, is there something you see, or that we can help people see this more acutely? The other one that was given to me, which is a wonderful little perspective on this, because we globalize, more of a global economy. People in British Columbia, we had a massive migration of people from Hong Kong, and all of a sudden, the next day, your boss is Chinese or from Hong Kong. You get really aware when the person that's responsible for your paycheck, right, economically becomes a big deal. So then it switches, right, from the broader economic benefit to the personal economic benefit. Oh, I need to be more understanding of different races, right? How can that happen in this community? Are there better ways to help white kids see other colors, right? Earlier in their lives? Any perspective on that? I know I just rambled on, but there's just so much you've talked about that's really fascinating. And I have a tendency to want to go for solutions. Like, where can we go for answers? And I don't know.
We live in segregated neighborhoods. And so if you're not intentional, it's all to me about relationships and intention. Mm-hmm. Right? If you understand that we live in a global world, if you understand that that our communities are becoming more and more diverse, if you see it as necessary, just like you put your kids in Mandarin, mm-hmm. right? You put them in it because you want them to be a global citizen, and then you don't put them in experiences to know the people. Like, there are intentional decisions that we do with our children, and one of them should be ensuring that they have diverse relationships around them. Mm-hmm. Like, I see that as a fundamental, but I didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm in a minority population here. My experience is set in whiteness. Mm-hmm. And then I have a family that looks like me, and I have some places that I might be able to go to, like church. But I can't dependably find another place in the city where I'm going to find all Black people. There's no other place, church and home. Mm. Right? And maybe an organization or two, maybe. Yeah. But so I didn't have the choice with my children to decide that I only want them to be around people that look like me in this city.
Right.
Do you think people make that choice? Is it, or are they just not aware that they're making that choice?
If you're not aware that you're around all white people, then you just got to do some work. Mm. Yeah. Like, you're probably not ready to take your kids out. if you don't realize that, you should probably just do your own work first.
You don't see it, right?
Right. I can look at, Facebook trolling or something, right? I can look at the diversity of who shows up on people's timelines, and I can see if they're intentional about their experiences or not. Mm-hmm. 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 And if you are at work talking about equity and inclusion, but your personal life is not inclusive, it's misaligned for me.
Mhm.
And I know in my mind, this is a work relationship. And I'm just giving examples that
Yep.
it's not comfortable to go to spaces that are not reflective of you. But that is the experience of children
Mhm.
and people and women in this community every day. And if people can do it that have been marginalized for generations, then I don't know what the barrier could be other than your own limitations that you're setting,
Mhm.
which seem quite easy to jump over. And I can't figure out, in the worst case scenario, what would happen. Someone doesn't want to be your friend. So
Mhm.
we've experienced that, probably starting in kindergarten, like we get over it.
Mhm.
And then in the best case situation, you meet a lot of really fantastic people that build your life to be more rewarding, that expand your worldview, that inform your thinking and how you're showing up at work, that inform your experience and where you go and where you eat. And I mean, my world is so expansive because of the rich diversity of people around me. I can't imagine it. If
Mhm.
my experience was just all Black all the time, I just can't envision it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Chanda said, and as the white people need to get out of their little comfort zones that we're in. I include myself in this. And if you want to start in a way that makes you more comfortable, there are all sorts of festivals that we can go to, and they're wonderful celebrations of different communities, different cultures, and then it's just a way to start learning about different experiences here, and all right here in this region.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you both for sharing. No, I'll tell you, Chanda, I have 2 young kids and we moved here from Atlanta. And I'm trying to find a way, right? It was a completely different experience in Atlanta where diversity was all around us. And to hear you say, and so this is just, it's a curiosity of mine in terms of how can I, even in our school where my kids are in elementary school, there's not the diversity that we saw in the city that we initiated, right, where they were born. And the burden is not on people of color to find ways to intermingle with, right, white people. So it's just an interesting, how do we bridge that? How do we introduce our children to this diversity of culture that is not obvious in a city that is quite segregated? And I'm not expecting you to answer that. It's a loaded question. Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it for me is a little bit of what Alison said, and some of it is looking at curriculum standards and what are they introducing you to?
Right.
Right. And I remember looking at my son's classwork and saying, how is it possible for you to be in an English class and have this much reading and there's no diversity of who the authors are?
Right.
In calling up the superintendent and making a lot of noise about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not about my children, about these are your words. This is how it is showing up. Please explain to me. Because performative actions should have no place in anybody's workplace or system. They need to go away. And to me, this is performative.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the limitations of life, but there's so many ways to infuse experience in your travel, enforcing curriculum, right? Insisting on hires, using your leadership to encourage different decision-making where you live. That allows for the introduction, to allow for where we started, the vendor, the business diversity,
Yeah.
all of those things. I mean, we don't get there unless we all participate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank
And
you.
the Science Museum did a great job with the exhibit and the work that you're doing. And there's places that you can go to like that provide introduction as well.
Yeah, and we've updated the exhibit Race, Are We So Different? And the wonderful thing with the exhibit is it is a great place to have conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are open, and the exhibit is it is really designed for those conversations, to come in and talk about race and learn about people's lived experiences. So
It's an amazing
I'd love to see
exhibit.
you there.
I've
Thanks.
taken my kids there as well. And you're absolutely right. It's having those conversations, honest conversations, in a way that when it comes to children that they can understand, and then seeking those. Chanda, thank you for sharing your thoughts too, in terms of how, again, it's not, the burden's not on you to answer that for me as a white parent. It's more of a, let's have those conversations. How can we create an environment where people feel we can collectively, it's the human race, and I know that's an ideal world that we all are striving for, but how can we have the conversations about how do we get there? What steps are we taking, and being very intentional? So thank you both for sharing your thoughts there.
And I mean, I think part of the work is, right, like I get asked about like population change and impact and systems work all of the time. And there's a place for that conversation.
Yeah.
But all of those things are made up of people and relationships.
Right.
Infinity groups exist because people need to come together to find community, to find allies, to have a place where someone understands your experience. And we're still in a place where there is individual work that feeds into the system. And I think that sometimes we externalize movement on these issues to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my point is every day I think about how can I be more inclusive?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? How can I stretch my experience in a way that I hadn't the day before? Like I actively think about this. And I think when we actively think about it and we act into it, it just becomes more comfortable. And then you begin to see the injustice differently, because now you're actually attached to someone who experiences it.
Mm-hmm.
And that results in different actions and a different agency around it. And I think that's what needs to happen.
Right. Would you say empathy is a word that would be used in this conversation, or is it's obviously much bigger than that, but being empathetic of each other in a variety of ways, not just be a race, but just trying to understand, not make assumptions that we understand a culture, a race, a gender.
My
Curious.
only holding back with empathy is it's so aligned with sympathy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, for me, it's hard to truly put myself in Chanda's shoes,
Right.
and to really know that experience of being Black in America.
Mm-hmm.
And what that lived experience. I mean, every so often I feel I get a little glimpse of it and what it must be like, but I know I don't really know it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's my only hesitation. I like the phrase that Chanda used earlier of decentering myself.
Mm-hmm.
And just, so I don't know. I don't know if Chanda, what do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't use the word. I mean, the decentering, I think, is what decentering one's experience. We have the tools to do this. I think when race enters, we lock up.
Mhm.
So if you work in a consumer facing business, you think about your consumer. What does a consumer want?
Mhm.
And you go out and you think about it that way. And you put yourself in positions to understand the needs of others all the time in business.
Mhm.
But for whatever reason in the social construct, those same sort of muscles, the same sort of thinking doesn't seem to apply. You can assume what the customer wants all the time.
Mhm.
You know, sit in the room and do it without any examination or understanding what community needs, and see how often you miss the mark. And if we're doing that in the social sector, and we do that in the social sector, by the way,
Mhm.
we're going to miss the mark. And I just keep coming back to, when you're in relationship with people differently, you're not putting your assumptions there. You are actually leaning in to learn and to understand. And you can't be in learning when you are uncomfortable or restricted. You're just not in the stance to do that, right? If you're on defense,
Mhm.
right? If you're waiting for the person to just say that one thing, you just can't do it. And I'll tell you right now, like, I would shut down every day. I mean, I hear something usually by noon every day that just wants me to go punch a wall.
Mhm.
But what good would that do?
Right.
Well, I hope you didn't hear anything here that made you punch a wall. But
No,
I did
I
say the
don't even know what time it
ballerina.
is. I don't think it's noon yet. I think I'm good.
Not even noon. Is that noon yet? Okay, maybe we can get you to noon. I did mention that before we got going, that the image that came to mind from your podcast was that, and we have not gone on to the other subjects that we wanted to cover. But this is such a, I mean, it's hard to get into a comfortable conversation about race and racism. It's hard to, it's not easy for people to do that, right? It is, because it feels like, you have profound guilt that, there's a lot of emotions that are tied up in that. And but I mentioned the idea that in your podcast, the image that came to mind was a ballerina on a stage of landmines, and how you were able to move around in a very elegant way and cover really intense subjects, in a way that felt like, okay, we can have this conversation today, and that people can talk about it and talk about, like, we have a natural thing built into us that we have to overcome. It comes from our history and the neighborhoods and the places we grew up and the biases that exist within us, you know. And yes, you have to get past the guilt, because I think the guilt is a constraint. It's something that shuts people down, and they have to get to
The
action.
guilt is ego, and it is centering of oneself.
Yeah, yeah, it
Right?
is.
That guilt that allows that puts your feelings above the experience of someone else.
Mhm.
So
Right?
true.
I mean, that's what happens.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I can understand it to some extent, I suppose. But if you really think about the decentering, right? If you're feeling guilty and that guilt is not allowing you to engage,
Mhm.
then you're just in self-preservation mode. You are basically just protecting you are staying in a self-protective mode,
Mhm.
which is how we've gotten here and how we will remain. If
yeah,
people take a protective stance, protecting systems, protecting themselves,
yeah,
protecting from the scary things over here, right? I understand and I acknowledge the emotion. It's not the emotion that's the problem. It's if the emotion if you can't transcend the emotion to action, that's the problem. Because we all experience guilt and fear, right? It's fear and guilt and shame that are like the main inhibitors.
I also think, Chanda, ego gets in the way. Ego gets in the way. People think, well, I worked hard. That's how I got here. And it wasn't, I didn't have any help getting here. I didn't have any privilege. Whereas I know absolutely I had a lot of privilege. And if I'd been a Black woman, I would not be the present CEO of the Science Museum of Minnesota.
Maybe next year, but not when you came. You know what I mean? Like maybe in the future, not next year. But I mean, because you know, now George Floyd happened and the city's like, oh gosh, we got to hire Black people. You know, and it's like, that's great. And you need to be prepared to support Black leadership and brown leadership. You can't just symbolically make hires without the work. Can I talk about ego for a second? I know we have a minute.
No, please do. Yes.
So last night, Alison and I were together with a group of other ladies, and I had a conversation about ego. And I know I've been referencing the podcast. I don't know why it's triggering all these conversations, but I had a conversation with Van Jones. It was off the podcast time, and he talked to me about manage your ego and nurture your spirit. And it has stuck with me a lot. And he's like, you need your ego. You have to have I believe I can, which is your ego, right? No one else can do it better, right? Like it's me, I can do this. That's ego. But an unhealthy ego is prohibitive. So you have to keep it in balance. And ego is necessary, but if not managed, it can be dangerous. It could be toxic to you and to others. But the nurturing of the spirit is very essential. And one of the things that he said is one of the key things that he has learned is that you have to have someone in your life that is experiencing the same thing as you, that you can talk to. So if you're a white male navigating issues of race, and you're serious about it, find other white males that are serious about it. To nurture that spirit and be able to have a space in which you do have comfort talking about these issues. Or if I'm experiencing whatever in the workplace, I need to find someone that has a similar role as I do, right? That's also a mom that can nurture my experience and my spirit. And I found that to be really, really helpful. And particularly with issues like this that are really quite personal, historical, societal, necessary. I mean, it is layered and it is complicated. And then you add in parenting and you're like, no, I'm guilty because I'm not doing the diversity thing with my kid, right? Like, this is not a test. This is all about organizing in a way that allows us to keep moving. And I just thought it was really super helpful advice.
God, that's really good.
That's a great perspective.
I unfortunately, we are at the end of our hour, and we promised our hour, and we're also having another meeting that's bumping into us. So I have to end this, and this has been absolutely amazing. And I know we could go for 2 or maybe even 3 hours. It makes me feel like we should invite you back next year for another conversation about this.
Yes.
Person,
not that next time.
Yes, in person next time. Thank you both for doing this. It was absolutely amazing. And we will be sharing this as far and wide as we possibly can, because this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. Thank you for letting us have this conversation and facilitating and being a part of it with us. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
See you all.
Everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.